getting all students algebra ready. Honestly, we need to see ourselves as lower grade teachers in this continuum and this process that we want students to be capable and ready to pass algebra and move on from there. So let's look at what algebra is. It's making sense of mathematical situations and relationships, representing mathematical relationships, and identifying and manipulating patterns, making generalizations, identifying and analyzing change. So if I think about that, look at how much of that can be communicated and built and developed through visuals, relationships, situations, making sense, representing, manipulating patterns, identifying patterns, identifying and analyzing how something changes. All of that is very visual. So it also sounds like the math practices, doesn't it? Making sense of problems and persevering and solving them, modeling mathematics. Then we've got the academic conversation and the math practice 3 about making arguments and communicating your reasoning. But these visuals are going to help us do these things to communicate our reasoning. And to critique the reasoning of others, I have to be able to understand it. I have to be able to access it. And the visuals are really going to help us there. Math practices 7 and 5 and 7, looking at structure and looking at repeated reasoning, those are also covered here. So keeping our math practices in the forefront and keeping our visuals in the forefront is really going to empower students to be ready for algebra. So I usually, when I do this talk with teachers, I give them this piece, which is in our California framework, and it's a progression of Algebra 1 and mathematics through kindergarten through 8th grade. So this is like an algebra progression. What are they doing in kindergarten and in each grade as you go forward? And most of you have probably, if you teach math, have seen this, or if you look at your grade level, you have seen those pieces that you're responsible for moving students forward. And you've also seen the things that they never really mastered beforehand. But I'm going to ask you, I'm hoping I've given you a little bit of time to see it. You can see it in your framework if on page 14, if you would like to have one for yourself. And then I would like you to look at this. It's the exact same, only the words are now replaced with visuals. Is it not mind-opening to think there is a visual to represent all of those pieces all the way up through grade 8? I have to thank Matt Cash in Riverside for showing me this at a training one time many years ago and allowing me to have access to it. It was quite a piece of work that I believe he got from someone else, and I don't know who, or I would give them credit. This is a fabulous, fabulous piece of work that is just so interesting. So I leave it here and ask you to pause and really take a look at this. Look at your grade level. So if I am grade 3, I'm looking at what came before that students would have been using. That's an important piece, because if we as a school are committed to visuals or are using visuals, part of our regular practice, it's oftentimes teachers don't know what students were doing the year before. So knowing what visuals they probably used the year before and maybe checking on that will help you build on that knowledge for your visuals in your grade. And it's a progression. It's a progression of building these brain pathways to see these things visually and to have them make sense. So I really hope that this is of use to you in seeing this progression and how number lines could fit in here so well. You'll see some, but I could actually probably make most of these visuals into a number line. So those are really powerful, but there's lots of other ways also. And we want to give students access to multiple ways of seeing things. So by looking at that, I ask you to stop and maybe discuss this. Compare. How was it for you looking at the words of the algebra progression? And how much access did you gain from that in that small amount of time versus looking at the visuals and how much access you were given to that information and the point I was trying to make in the progression of these visuals to you quickly. So compare how one to the other. You are going to have people who would prefer to have the words, but the quick, meaningful access from the visuals is usually much stronger. What do you think about what comes before you and what comes after you, and have a discussion with your colleagues about that? Or reflect on your own if you're doing this on your own. Maybe go back and stop and really look at what comes before, what comes after, where am I fitting in this continuum? And then how can being aware of math progressions, this is only the algebra one, but there are many, and the visual representations be a helpful tool for teachers? What can those visual representations and the awareness of them do for you? And how could they help you? So I encourage you to stop the video and maybe go back and look at those progressions again, the visual and the words, to see what your thoughts are on these questions, or have a conversation with your colleagues. So in lower grades, this is very familiar. We have our dots. We use them in dot talks for all age groups. Even adults love dot talks, and that's kind of an upcoming module. But we subitize in kindergarten. We want students to be able to look at that and just know how many they are without counting them one by one. And that's probably the majority of what they are used for. Then we move to 10 frames in first grade and to kindergarten, even second grade, using those 10 frames as a reference. We're teaching kids to use benchmarks. Think about that when you move to 4th and 5th grade, using benchmark fractions and benchmark decimals. We want to start teaching that in the lower grades with benchmark numbers, benchmark visuals. We want to teach them to, we have always done this, but not always explicitly. The 10s, the 5s, the 2s, how does that skip counting help you? There's a little piece on choral counting in our number talk section. So you can see that progression of these benchmarks and using these things to move them up that progression. Place value understanding. Now we're moving from those round dots or the objects that we're using for quick images, and we're moving into these hundreds, tens, and ones, and getting a little more abstract in the procedural math. So using those blocks to really get that conceptual learning down and the meaning of that. And you're going to see an image in a minute that will really show you how you can take this expanded notation and drawing of the blocks and playing with them and all of that, and take it to a new level, which is what we're talking about, depth. We don't want to just be drawing these tens and ones and hundreds in first and second grade. We want to keep that understanding and build on it. I'll show you that in just a minute. So here's some visuals for addition and subtraction. You have what they call number bonds, tape diagrams, hundreds chart. There's an amazing woman, I've seen her videos on number talks where she uses the hundreds chart to do the number talks with her kids. And it's almost like a number line. She uses it like a number line. It's really fascinating. Base 10 blocks and quick images. So we want to teach them a notation that they can use for base 10 blocks. It's very quick. We all lower grade teachers have been there with them making teeny weeny little squares, and they're trying to put all of the lines and make them perfect. No, we're just going to do a quick quick square and quick circles for the ones and quick lines for the tens, because we want to get to the understanding and not worry about the art. I used to call it the art because my little artists and my little perfectionists wanted them to be perfect. So we want to make sure they're focusing on the process of learning mathematics as opposed to the art right at this moment. And then number lines, so huge. If you're adding 37 plus 48, well, let's start at 37. Now, can I add 40 in my head? That's 77. Now, could I have 8 to add, but ooh, I could break that into a 5 and a 3 because I'm at 77. So that'll get me to 80 if I add 3, and then 85. That's where we want to get kids. So by doing number talks and number line routines as consistent parts of your week and your curriculum, you are going to have mathematically powerful students just by making a few changes. And those few changes will spill over because you're going to see this conversation and this engagement and this activity, and it'll spill over into all of your other subjects also. Okay, unfortunately, sorry, that video is no longer linked, so I'm skipping it. I couldn't find it anywhere. The teaching channel used to have amazing videos, and now you have to pay for them. So I couldn't have that in this module for you. But I'm going to ask, we do have lots of academic conversation videos, and so you're going to get that as you go throughout this, this course. Why do manipulatives, visuals, and drawings decline sharply and steadily after first grade, right as the requirements for explanations increase? So look at this graph for a minute. You got the pink visuals going from kindergarten, where I'm using them less and less and less and less and less all the way to grade 12. And yes, sometimes there's a little uptick there in junior high to high school with graphing. There are visuals and graphing probably because it's necessary. It's a need, so they have to be there. But we've got a huge gap in between. Instead of building so that when they get to those, they're really familiar with these kinds of visual concepts that go on. And then the explanations from kindergarten, we've got to increase those explanations. We've got to increase that sense making and reasoning from K forward. But I'm suddenly expected, what kids have had is they're not expected to explain or communicate reasoning and understanding and sense making in the lower grades. And then it steadily increases huge right as the visuals are going down. And what can we do to change that? That's what this is about. Becoming aware of how you can change that so that the visuals are supporting the explanation, so that in kindergarten, I have this high visual, let's defend and explain those and have that sense making and conceptual understanding communicated by the student, not by the teacher at certain points. And so we want those to be more even on both sides so that we're having the visuals and the explanations high on both. So I'm going to give you some more examples of coherence with these. So using appropriate tools. So here you go. Here's a number line. And you'll notice you saw these little tick marks. Because it's in this, I'm going to mention something about this because it comes up all the time. When students are asked to draw a number line, they don't need all these tick marks. So if your book or your resources are always having those tick marks in there, don't try to help kids learn. They don't need them. They can have an open number line with the two extremes, whatever they may be. We'll get into that in the number line presentation. And then just put dots where they're putting their other pieces based on those two extremes. But they don't need these constant little tick marks. Yes, when we're teaching in very much lower grades and we have big spaces, we want to teach them that their intervals are even and give them some grounding. So if they're struggling, I will do that, certainly, and when they're young. But as they get older, start moving to an open number line, and it frees them up from these little petty details of the spacing and all these marks all over the place. It's very difficult for students and for teachers to see their thinking. So here is, I'm doing 243, and then I'm going to subtract each chunk, the 100, the 20, and the 1. And you can see How easily you can do that in your head. Now ask yourself, if you taught kids this instead of the algorithm, how much more powerful would they be and how much more fun would it be? That's the piece right there. I've yet to find a teacher who says, oh no, they'll make less mistakes with the algorithm, or oh no, they like this better, or oh no, whatever else. When I do encounter that resistance to the visuals or changing the way of procedures, it's because they don't see the how of making it better. So they see this as really difficult. So I'm hoping that this module will really help fill in that gap in understanding of how this is so much easier for teachers and so much more effective for students. So connecting subtraction and decomposing to the distributive property, I want to point out that not only are you teaching them to subtract, not only are you improving their working memory by holding these things, but you are improving their ability to latch on to the distributive property in future grades by doing this type of math with them. So we want to see ourselves as a part of that progression. I encourage you to pause and read through this task, because it shows you, remember I told you the base 10 blocks were coming back up. Suddenly, older students are seeing how open math is. It's intriguing, it's creative. Well, wait a minute, I thought those were hundreds and tens and ones, but could they be different? So we're asking kids, what numbers could this show? And you'll see that one of them says that a big square represents 1. And if that big square represents 1 whole, then this number is 2 43/100. Another student said, well, I drew that. I have the same picture, but these reds are 1s. So that means that this is 243. So then the question for the class to investigate could be, is there any other number that this could represent? Could they defend another way of this working? So you can see how it opens up that thinking. It's about depth of understanding, and it's about building these visual skills and tools all the way forward so that they can go to a deep task like this.